They called her the empty vessel, a woman cursed by the spirits. When her own tribe cast her out into the middle of the savannah to die for her infertility, they thought they had sealed her fate. But they could never have imagined that fate would lead her to a grieving warrior and 3 motherless children who needed her more than they could ever know. This is the story of how a woman who could not bear children became the greatest mother of all. For the Kaya tribe, who lived in the shade of the great baobab trees, a woman's worth was measured by the number of children she could bear. Children were the tribe's future, the strength of its hunters, and the bounty of the land. That is why Amara, after 7 years without giving a child, was considered cursed. Her beauty, her kind heart, and her diligence were nothing in the face of her barrenness. Her husband's family looked at her with disappointment every day, and the village women whispered cruelly behind her back, "Her land is dry, her womb is barren." Though Amara tried to ignore these words, every syllable was a thorn piercing her heart. Finally, the council of elders made their decision. The dry season was harsh, and they believed that harboring a cursed person within the tribe was driving away prosperity. The chief stood before Amara, his face showing no emotion, and announced the verdict. "Amara, you have become a burden to the Kaya people. The spirits have turned their backs on you. You can no longer stay among us." This was more than a decision of exile. It was a death sentence. No one could survive alone in the wild without the protection of the tribe. Even her husband avoided her gaze. He had bowed to the pressure of his family and his tribe. They gave Amara only a small water pouch and a handful of dried meat. They took her to the edge of the tribe's lands, to the shade of a large acacia tree, where lions and hyenas hunted, and left her there alone. When she looked back one last time, she saw that the village that was once her home and the man she loved had turned their backs on her. As tears streamed down her cheeks, she began to walk, with no destination, left to the mercy of despair and the wilderness. She was now a woman with no one, all alone in the middle of the savannah. Miles away from where Amara was exiled, a warrior named Zion was returning home, accompanied by 3 small shadows. Zion was one of the bravest hunters of his tribe, but ever since losing his wife to a fever 2 years ago, he carried not just the weight of his hunt on his shoulders, but the entire weight of a family. He was now both a father and a mother, and this was a battle far harder than wielding a spear. His eldest daughter, Imani, though only a 9-year-old child, tried to take on her mother's role, looking after her siblings. His middle son, Kyle, had retreated into silence since his mother's death. The youngest, 4-year-old Nia, frequently pained her father's heart by asking for her mother. While tracking a wounded gazelle, Zion noticed a dark shape lying motionless among the rock shadows. He instinctively gripped his spear. A lone woman in these lands was either a trap or a bad omen. Signaling his children to stay back, he approached slowly. What he saw was a woman, her clothes in tatters, on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion and thirst. On her face was a sorrow Zion knew all too well, the pain of being rejected by the world she belonged to. His warrior instincts told him, "Stay away, this is not your problem." But the voice of a father inside him whispered that he could not leave this woman to die. Just then, little Nia clung to her father's leg and pointed at Amara. "Papa," she said in her tiny voice, "the lady is sad." These innocent words tore down the final wall of hesitation in Zion's heart. Mercy, his wife had told him before she died, is a warrior's greatest strength. Zion offered the last of the water in his flask to the woman. When Amara opened her eyes, she saw an imposing warrior and 3 small faces peering curiously from behind him. She flinched in fear, but in the man's eyes there was no threat, only a weary compassion. Without a word, Zion helped her to her feet. Unsure if she had been saved or dragged into a new captivity, Amara began to stumble after this strange warrior. Zion's camp was less a large village and more a secluded home consisting of 3 huts. It was clear that Zion preferred to grieve on his own. When Amara arrived at the camp, 3 pairs of little eyes scrutinized her carefully. The eldest girl, Imani, stood with her arms crossed, a look of stern distrust on her face, as if Amara were an unwelcome guest who had come to take her mother's place. Kyle, as usual, quietly withdrew to a corner and ignored her presence. Only the youngest, Nia, watched this new, sad woman with childlike curiosity, sucking her thumb. Amara demanded nothing from them. She simply sat in the corner of the empty hut she was shown to and quietly observed her surroundings. What she saw was the poignant disarray of a loving but motherless home. A torn blanket, a carelessly prepared meal, the children's tangled hair. Her maternal instinct, a compassion her womb could not give, overflowed. Putting her own pain aside, she began to help in small ways. Without anyone asking, she mended Imani's torn blanket. She showed them how to cook the roots Zion brought back from the hunt to make them more delicious. The real turning point came when little Nia tripped on a sharp stone and fell. As the child began to cry, Zion and Imani were busy with another task. Without a moment's thought, Amara rushed to the child's side. She gently took her into her arms, cleaned the wound, and pressed a leaf known by the women of the Kaya tribe to stop bleeding onto the cut. Her soft voice and gentle touch, which soothed the child, did not escape the notice of Zion, who was watching from a distance. This woman's hands, just like his wife's hands, brought healing and peace. That evening, as Zion cooked the meat over the fire, he offered the best piece to Amara. It was an unspoken thank you, the first step of acceptance. As Amara took the meat, she saw in Zion's eyes not just suspicion anymore, but a hint of respect and curiosity. Perhaps fate had taken one family from her, but now it was opening the door to a completely different one. Amara's presence was slowly turning Zion's camp into a home. They no longer sat by the fire out of necessity, but to share the stories of the day. Amara quietly touched the lives of the children. She had noticed that the silent Kyle, who missed his mother the most, kept a small broken spearhead from an old battle. One night, Amara took the piece of metal, polished and sharpened it, and attached it to a sturdy shaft suitable for the boy's height. When Kyle found the spear in the morning, he didn't say a word, but for the first time that day, he looked directly into Amara's eyes and gave a slight nod. It was a thank you more powerful than words. The biggest obstacle, however, was Imani. The girl, fiercely loyal to her mother's memory, saw Amara as a threat. One evening, as a fierce storm battered the savannah, thunder shook the huts. Though Imani tried to look strong, she was trembling with fear. Amara sat beside her, and instead of trying to mother her, she acted like a confidant. "You know," she whispered, "I used to be very afraid of storms, too. My mother told me that thunder was the sound of our ancestors playing drums in the sky, a celebration." She reached out to Imani by honoring her mother's memory. That night, Imani fell asleep not to the ghost of her mother, but to the presence of the warm, reassuring woman beside her. Zion watched all these changes with admiration. He saw the forgotten smiles returning to his children's faces. The camp was no longer just a shelter, but a place filled with laughter and the smell of warm food. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he told Amara about his wife, about what a brave woman she had been. It was the first time he had shared his grief with anyone. Amara just listened, accompanying him with a silence that understood his pain. That night, Zion realized that Amara had begun to heal not only his children, but his own wounded soul as well. She was the missing heart of this little family. When they returned to the village, the little girl's breath was ragged and weak. The entire village had gathered around the fire in a vigil of hope and fear. With trembling hands, Alara mixed the quinine powder with water, and with Licarian's help, administered it to the child. What followed were hours in which time stood still. Ilara never left the girl's side for a moment, placing damp cloths on her forehead and whispering English lullabies. Licarian stood beside her like a statue, his presence giving her a silent strength. As dawn broke, a miracle occurred. The child's fever dropped. She opened her eyes and called for her mother in a weak voice. A silence fell over the village, followed by cries of joy. The women ran towards Alara, the same women who had scorned her just yesterday, calling her the white burden, now touched her with tears of gratitude in their eyes, blessing her. Alara was no longer a stranger. She was the one who brought the healing powder, a sacred, life-saving guest. That evening, a small celebration was held in the village. There was dancing and singing, but Alara's eyes searched only for Licarion. Later that night, Licarion led her to an acacia tree just outside the village. The full moon illuminated the savannah with a silvery light. "You," said Licarion, his voice filled with an emotion she had never heard before, "didn't just save a child. You gave us back our hope. You reminded me of something I had forgotten." Alara didn't ask what it was, because she already knew the answer. Licarion slowly approached her and met her lips with a kiss full of respect, gratitude, and a blossoming love. That kiss was a moment where two worlds merged, where all pain and differences lost their meaning. There was no turning back now. Months passed. Alara and Licarion's love took root, as strong as the mightiest tree on the savannah. Alara was now a part of the village, speaking their language and respecting their traditions. But the ghost of her past was not slow to find them. Captain Davies, burning with a desire for revenge, gathered a military unit and set out for the village under the pretext of rescuing an English lady from the hands of savages. When Davies and his soldiers arrived at the village, they expected to find a frightened woman, but what they found was a queen, adorned with Maasai jewelry, standing tall with fire in her eyes. "Alara, put an end to this nonsense and come with me," Davies commanded. Alara held Licarion's hand and replied, "This is my home, these are my people, and this man is my husband." In the short but fierce conflict that erupted after these words, the Maasai warriors were nearly unbeatable on their own land. Licarion defeated Davies in single combat, but did not kill him. "My people are not murderers," he said, and sent him away in dishonor. Years later, Alara and Licarion had become the parents of a mixed-race son who united their two worlds. Alara had established a small clinic in the village, saving countless lives by combining her knowledge of Western medicine with the tribe's healing wisdom. One day she received a letter from her father. The old governor had heard of his daughter's deeds, understood his mistake, and begged for her forgiveness. That evening, as Alara and Licarion watched the magnificent African sunset with their son, Alara squeezed her husband's hand. She knew that her greatest punishment had turned into her life's greatest blessing. She had learned that true civilization is not built in lavish mansions, but in places where love, respect, and courage reside. And her home was now in this wild yet honest land, forever.